Well, in the Australian Music Vault today, singer-songwriter and one of the strongest voices in the Australian music landscape, Deborah Conway. Welcome.
Nice to be here, Jane Gazzo.
In the early 80s, you put an ad in the paper with your phone number and just 3 words. The 3 words were, singer needs band.
So do you actually have this ad somehow? Is this turned up in the archives somewhere? I thought it was Singer Wants Band, but nevertheless, that'll do.
I'll do it again. Singer Wants Band.
No, it's fine. Yes, I did. It was a friend of mine's idea. I'd just done some shows at RMIT, the ARIA Review, and I'd heard the tapes and I sounded pretty good. And John had heard the tapes and he thought I sounded pretty good. And it hadn't really occurred to me before that I should join a very old friend of mine who I'd gone to Jewish summer camp with, right. And we'd been close for a long time already, and I was 20, and he found a way in for me that I had never imagined, but it was such an obvious way to do it. So I did. I put an ad in the paper, and I got 2 responses. One from a fellow called Cy and Lucas, who turned up at my house and was very kind of an impressive man in black, and had some big ideas and ambitions, and wanted me to be a part of that. And then I also was asked to go and audition for a band somewhere in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. So I carefully selected my wardrobe, which was, I think, a bright green suede miniskirt, tight black jumper, and blue tap shoes without the taps.
I love that you can remember what you were wearing.
It was a good outfit. It's a good outfit. I like clothes. And turned up, and, there was a few other people there to audition, and they were kind of more, slightly older men with beards, and they were a bit tubby, and, I thought, yeah, okay, I've got a pretty good chance here. So anyway, I got into the room and I did this audition, and it went well. It was good. And then I went home, and then I heard from both of them, Cy and Lucas, and Dorlan Bray, who was the drummer in the Benders, which is the band I'd auditioned for, was dispatched to my house to offer me the gig. And I think at that point I must have said something to Greg Thomas, who was the guitarist and maybe the driving force behind the Benders, the creative inspiration, that I was also considering this other option. And so he dispatched Dorlan to persuade me that the Benders were the way to go. So he did. He was a very persuasive fellow, and I joined the Benders.
It's fair to say Dorlan Bray would play quite a pivotal role in your early songwriting years.
Mm-hmm. He did, absolutely. He was, more than that. I mean, he was a musical mentor and a guide, around a lot of things, around my taste. Introduced me to things that maybe I hadn't been listening to. He was a great drummer, and he was, I suppose, after a period of time, he was the thing that was keeping me sane in this band, because we played a lot. The first few shows were incredible. I mean, it really was. I really felt like, wow, this is what I need to do. I love this. And then we just played night after night after night at all these different hotels in Melbourne. And, the crowds would thin out in the winter months, but we'd still be playing, and it wore me down. And the prog rock solos were getting longer, and everything was, it was feeling a bit stale and hard. And Dorlan and I were discussing our, dreams of starting something elsewhere in Sydney. He really wanted to move to Sydney. I didn't care that much, but I wanted to be in a band with him. And so, he said, I'm leaving. I said, okay, I'm leaving too. And then we moved to Sydney together and formed this band, RME.
It's fair to say your parents weren't too impressed with your career choice.
Mm-hmm.
They were quite conservative and felt that rock and roll was going to lead you to drugs and destruction?
I think it's unfair to characterise it as they. I think it was more my father,
Your father?
who was nervous about my my predilection to join a rock band, and which is interesting because he was the performer. He had wanted to tread the boards, but he didn't because, being a nice Jewish boy, he made his parents happy by reading the law, and so he didn't. He suppressed his desire, his deeply held desire, I think, to be a performer. And then, and then strangely, he didn't trust the fact, or maybe he was projecting what he would have done had he had he been a performer. But at any rate, he suggested I see a psychiatrist, and I did. And the psychiatrist and I decided I was perfectly sane, and it was my father that had the problem, and I knew that all along, of course, because he did. But yeah, it was a fait accompli.
So you moved to Sydney. What was Sydney like for a girl from Melbourne?
Sydney was fun, and Sydney was very vibey, and there was a lot going on. There was a lot of music going on. It was, I think, maybe the Pokies were starting to appear, but it was just before that, really. And so there was bands on everywhere all the time, and you could go and see something pretty much every night.
So how did you get what would become Do Re Mi together in Sydney with yourself and Dorland?
Dorland had met Helen Carter, who was the bass player in Do Re Mi, on a previous holiday that he'd had at a bar, and they were drunk, and they, realised that they were, each other's half in a rhythm section, and, they talked about, what musically they liked, and, maybe that they could do something or whatever. But what hadn't happened was an exchange of phone numbers.
Detective Conway on the case.
Yes,
How
that's
did you
right.
find her?
Oh, I tracked her down. I mean, Helen Carter is not a particularly unusual name, but being a female bass player was. So, yeah, I managed it. I worked it out.
And then the rest of the band comes together with Stephen Phillip.
So eventually Stephen was persuaded to join, but he wasn't a particularly willing participant at the beginning. And I don't know why. I never really figured that out. Maybe he wanted some distance, because Helen and Stephen were in a relationship together.
Ah.
They were a couple. And, they'd done everything together. He was persuaded to put some parts together for the stuff we were writing so that we could play them to the guitarists we were auditioning. But they would turn up and they would overplay, or they would play badly, or they would be obnoxious. Whatever it was, Stephen had exactly the formula of being someone who could generate great sounds, but be very kind of, but not be a lead guitarist in that way. So the melodies are mostly carried by the bass in Do Re Mi. Helen's bass riffs are so melodic, and they're so they're intricate, and they're
Pivotal,
they're pivotal.
as part of the sound of Do Re Mi. Absolutely.
Absolutely
Yeah.
pivotal. And Stephen was able to just conjure up these great soundscapes that where the bass would weave the melody in and out of that. So yeah, it was just an unusual kind of sound. No one really sounded like that at that time.
Was Dorland doing most of the writing of the music, or did you?
So Dorland would sometimes write the music, but Helen and Stephen also were writing music, and Dorland and I were writing lyrics. And I think probably Dorland had the most input into the songwriting. Yeah.
There's a great story about the early version of Man Overboard, which would become the single by which you launch into the mainstream. Was released by Roger Grierson and Stuart Coupe,
yes.
who had a little indie label.
Yeah, so that was the second EP. The first EP we released was called the Green EP. Their label was Green Records, Roger and Stuart. And the first single was Standing on Wires. And then we put out a second EP, and it was called The Waiting Room. The second EP came out, I think, in the same year that the first EP came out, so 1982.
I'm so glad you mentioned Standing on Wires, because revisiting that recently, that post-punk sound, it's just got everything in it, and to me doesn't sound dated.
Yeah, and it's so raw, and it's so spare. It's just, just the facts, ma'am. We just want, straight down the line. And that was the thing. It was picked up by every alternative radio station. And so after the experience of playing in the Benders 5 nights a week for 8 months, there were so many gigs, they weren't special anymore. And so when we got to Sydney, when we were constructing how we wanted to do this second bite at the cherry, this do-re-mi thing, we wanted each gig to be special. We wanted to put out recordings so that radio could discover us. And then when we got around to playing, we would have this audience that was there and keen to hear the things that they had been hearing on the radio. And this is a time when radio was kind of more
open.
It was more open, but it was more kind of integral to the way people kind of discovered music. I'm not sure that is the case anymore. But it was an essential part of how to discover things. So we organised it. We organised a gig. I think the first one was at the Art House. Is that what it was called? And it was jammed. It was absolutely jammed. And people heard this stuff that they were familiar with. And Standing on Wires was the song of the set. It wasn't Man Overboard. It was Standing on Wires, and people went mad for it. And it was great. And we had this little percussion ending that we all did. And I just remember the room heaving.
When you released the second EP with Man Overboard, there's a funny story about radio stations perhaps playing it at the wrong speed.
Yeah. So these were 12-inch EPs. So the first one was four songs, 2 songs per side, but it was a piece of 12-inch vinyl. But the instruction on the cover, and this was for the second one as well, was play it at 45 RPM. So that's the speed that you play a 7-inch single at.
Of course.
I guess the EPs were kind of relatively new at that point. But maybe the fact that The Waiting Room, which was the second EP, had 6 tracks on it, maybe that's why they thought, they should be playing it at 33 RPM. They would play Man Overboard, but they would play it at 33 RPM instead of at 45 RPM. And we would hear this song and I would sound like Nick Cave incanting, your pubic hairs are on my pillow. Anyway, and it was a punk thrash piece. So it didn't, it was severely slowed down, but it sounded legitimate. And we'd hear this and we'd heard it over and over again. Lots and lots of DJs made the same mistake. And then we started thinking, well, why don't we just slow it down? So we did.
Wow.
And that's how the version of Man Overboard that was a hit made it onto the recording of Domestic Harmony.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but my research suggests that Do-Re-Mi were one of the earliest signings to Virgin Records, who had just come from the UK to have a local arm. Is that correct? Along with Bear Garden?
And Samurai Trash.
And
there were
Samurai
3 of us.
Trash,
3
right.
of us. And, and so the 3 of us were the inaugural signings for Virgin UK, becoming Virgin Australia.
Right. Domestic Harmony's released.
Yes.
Man Overboard comes out. It's got pubic hair in the song lyrics. It's got
Penis envy. Anal humour. Let's not forget anal humour.
All about self-abuse. It doesn't even have a chorus. And yet it's massive.
It's massive.
It launches you into the stratosphere.
Yeah. It was
brilliant.
Great. It was fantastic that they picked up on it. And I remember it was us that didn't want to do it, us thinking they'll never play this, but the record company saying, oh yes, they will. And they were right. It was a massive hit. And I think it got to top 5 on the Australian pop charts.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think most extraordinarily, it didn't have a chorus. So it was really unlike anything else that was being played at the time.
How do you feel about the song now?
No, I still think it holds up well.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting, melodically really interesting, musically interesting, arrangement interesting, great lyric.
The guitar, the bass, I mean,
Yeah.
it all comes together. And I
Yeah.
remember the video clip so well. I mean, you were striking as a front woman, really.
Thank you.
It had so much influence. And I can remember the countdown performances. I can remember you on Sounds with Donnie Sutherland. It seemed you had come from nowhere, but of course you'd been playing the traps for so long. Were you ready for the success that song brought you?
Oh, yeah, I wasn't a young woman at that point. I think I was 25. I joined a band in 1979, and then it was 1985. But already, because, the Green EP had already been a hit on alternative radio, and then The Waiting Room was also picked up. And so this was sort of the next iteration of that success. And I think we just felt a little bit, untouchable. It was a nice feeling, but it wasn't completely unexpected.
What were the attitudes of the industry and the public towards Do Re Mi at the time?
Yeah, I think people thought I was difficult. I don't know why.
Is that because you were opinionated?
Probably. It didn't particularly bother me. I mean, I think Helen maybe got the same kind of flack as well.
In 85, you also play what would become a really significant concert. It was called Oz for Africa, and also on that bill that day was In Excess, I'm Talking, Machinations, Models, Men at Work, Electric Pandas, and The Mentals.
It was a lineup of all the Australian bands that had been getting chart success and getting loved up by the Australian public. So, yeah, it was an incredible day. It was it was a world event. So it was amazing to be part of that. And the concert's a bit of a blur. But, the backstage, as you could imagine, was completely buzzing and, and everybody was feeling very kind of special about being part of this extraordinary global event that was put on to achieve so much good. I mean, it's a bit hard to know exactly what the impacts of that concert were and how much money actually got to the source of what they were trying to raise it for. But it was an incredible thing to be part of, and I'm grateful for that.
Who did you love performing with? Which bands?
Well, I really like the Coloured Girls.
Ah, yeah.
And Hunters and Collectors. And we did a big tour with Midnight Oil at that point, around there, which was great. We played, I think I'm Talking supported us at the Chevron Hotel. And I remember being kind of terrified because I'd just been hearing all of these stories about this incredible singer and how wonderful she was. And I thought, oh my God, she's going to blow me off stage. So I wore a bright purple tutu.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I fell over at one point because I was dancing so hard. Anyway, but yeah, we have remained friends ever since.
That, of course, being Kate Sobrano,
yeah,
right?
She's beautiful and warm and welcoming.
Wow. On the Waiting Room EP, a man by the name of Paul Hester played on that record. You would end up dating him.
I was dating him then.
Right.
Yeah. So we lived together in Melbourne. I needed someone to move into my house, and I was told that there was a drummer looking for a room, so I went and saw his gig, and I loved his playing. And then
so
we
was
met.
this Deck Chairs Overboard at that
No,
time?
it was before Deck Chairs Overboard. It was the Czechs.
The Czechs.
Yeah. And then we met, and I just loved him, and he loved me, and we just became very good friends. And we lived together for a year, and then I left Melbourne and went to Sydney. And then he, with his band, which had then become Deck Chairs Overboard, and then they finally put out their record. So they moved up to Sydney, and Paul moved into my place in North Sydney, which is where I was living. And at some point during that period, we became boyfriend and girlfriend. So we were together, I don't know, 4 years or something. And
did you watch with great interest as he went global, stratospherically with Crowded House?
Yeah, I was very happy for him. So we split up after we were living in separate towns. He joined Split Ends, and it was becoming an untenable kind of, and was fractious, difficult to kind of make things work. Long distance relationships are always a bit tricky. And I was really happy for him. So it was great to see that. And I was devastated when he took his own life. It was just...
How did you find out?
John called me.
Wow.
John, who was in the guitar player in Man Overboard, and our very dear mutual friend. Yeah, I remember it was Easter, and I'd gone away for a holiday with the family and just down the coast. Yeah, and he called me. It was terrible.
Do you miss him?
Oh yeah, I do.
What do you miss?
Oh, I just think it's so tragic. I mean, I've had this has happened to me a few times now, numbers of times, and every time, and I'm angry too. You know, I still feel angry. How could you do that to your kids? And I mean, surely it was just a moment, and yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things. But yeah, I do miss him because he would have been we still would have been good friends.
Still would have been making incredible music too.
As well.
The late great journalist Ed Nimmervoll once wrote of Do-Re-Mi, like the Saints preempted punk, Do-Re-Mi were at the forefront of women breaking into the boys' club called rock and roll. In retrospect, too much importance can be placed on the fact that Do-Re-Mi was sexually balanced. 2 women and 2 men. It's something also that can be underestimated in its significance.
Or overestimated, perhaps. Look, you know, I mean, obviously it was a selling point for Do-Re-Mi that there was, you know, half men, half women. But, you know, at its core, I mean, it was about the songs and it was about how we played them. And a female voice is different to a male voice. But other than that, look, it was a breath of fresh air, I guess, you know, in that sense. And I think, and people responded to it like that as well. But, you know, after that initial feeling of, oh, well, that's unusual, let's check it out. They were there because the songs were really good and the playing was really good and the conviction was there. And rock and roll is nothing if not conviction.
Absolutely.
That's all it is, you know.
88, The Happiest Place in Town is released, the second album, and what would become the final album from Do-Re-Mi. Had the title track, Happiest Place in Town. It also had King of Moomba, very Melbourne. And it also had Adultery, with the chorus, something about...
Into the playground, you and me, we cannot grow up, we can commit adultery. Yeah.
Did you get flack for that?
No, I don't think we did. I don't know. Don't recall any flack.
You did have Martin Rushent produce the record,
We
though.
did.
Now, his
We
name
did.
was synonymous with The Human League, Heaven 17, Buzzcocks. How did that come about, and what was he like to work with?
He was a delight. He was an absolute delight. He was very committed and he loved what we were doing. And he worked his ass off getting the best possible sound, you know, for us that he could get. And we made the record in Battle in the town of Hastings and stayed at this lovely manor. And, you know, mostly it was happy. I think there was a few. The cracks were starting to show in the camaraderie, I suppose, within the group. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why it happened, but there were some fights, you know, some nastiness, and it's a little bit of violence.
Were Helen and Stephen able to maintain their relationship?
Oh yes, no, they were fine. I think it was me and the other 3 actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but anyway, you know, we got through it, and the record came out, and we toured, and then it sort of fell apart. Not very long after that. Yeah, we put out another single, Guns and Butter. That kind of got a little bit of traction, just reminded people that we were alive and existed. And I think, yes, and then it all kind of started to fall apart.
Well, it's around about this time that Virgin say they don't want a third album from Do-Re-Mi.
Well, we were already writing it, but we weren't coming up, I think, with the songs that Virgin were happy with. So they'd already had the flavour of what we were able to do with the third set of demos, and they weren't happy. So at that point they said, you know, how about, Deborah, you make us a solo album and we'll revisit the Do-Re-Mi third album after that. And I think we were all kind of, we were all surprised. I had no idea that was coming. And then and Virgin never went back. They never revisited the Do Re Mi third album. And I mean, the brutal story is that they dropped me too. The record that I made for them, which was very ill-conceived and expensive, let me tell you, was also dumped, probably for the best.
There's a version of Bad Company's Feel Like Making Love on YouTube, which you sing, which
Get out of
barely
here.
sounds like you, Deborah.
It's not on YouTube. How could it be?
It is. There's no video. It's just an audio recording.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's very dancey. Very dancey.
I made a dance record.
Yeah.
Can't dance. And I made a dance record.
Yeah, it's I think it's fair to say it's not your finest
No,
moment.
it's not my finest moment. Not my finest moment. No, it was they did me a big favor by dropping the record.
So what do you do? I mean, you've recorded this dance record that ain't great. Where do you go from there? They drop you.
I was sitting in London. I was my self-doubt was becoming huge. It was my dragon under the carpet. I knew it was just getting bigger and bigger, and I just knew that what I had made was absolutely dreadful, and I didn't want to put it out particularly. But I thought, I'm stuck. Here I am, and they're paying for everything. And but I was writing songs that I thought, well, these are much more authentic, and there's an authorial voice here that I am owning. And when Virgin dropped me, I knew that I had enough material to make an album, a convincing album that was much more reflective of who I was and what I wanted to say, and that was great. So I was able to kind of gather my resources and I came back via Los Angeles. That's where I met my manager, who I knew anyway, but I met her again there. And then I came back to Australia and signed to Mushroom Records and put out String and Pearls.
Is it during this period you meet another formidable voice in music, the Golden Palomino Sid Straw?
Yes, in London. We met in London, and we did. And I'd been obsessed with her because she also put a record out on Virgin, which was called Surprise. And I was playing it all the time, and I just loved her voice, and I loved those songs. And so because I didn't have much to do, I started writing songs that I thought she might sing. And then I bumped into her. I saw her in a cafe, and I went, how is that even possible? And I went over and introduced myself, and I told her that I'd written a song that I thought, that I could imagine her singing. And we hung out, and it turned out that she was in a very similar situation to me. She'd signed to Virgin, and this was her second album, and they were trying to, break her on the world stage, and she was being paired up, they do kind of like a speed dating thing with other writers, and she was doing that kind of thing, and she was a bit further along in the process than I was at that point. And she was disgruntled, and. But we got together and I played her this song, and she recorded it for her second album, which is called Tellingly War and Peace, but didn't come out on Virgin Records.
Ah.
And I wrote a song called I'm Not the Toughest Girl in the World, and she dropped I'm Not. So her song's called Toughest Girl in the World.
In fact, it opens the record.
It opens the record, yeah.
That must have been a thrill to have a writing credit.
Exactly, it was lovely.
String of Pearls comes out, 1991, 9 ARIA nominations. It's acoustic pop, it's gentle ballads, it's your authentic voice. What do you remember about that period?
Oh, that it was, it just felt fantastic because it felt like I was completely in control.
You co-wrote most of the tracks on the record.
I co-wrote or I wrote all the tracks, yes. I didn't do any covers.
No.
So, yeah. And yeah, there was a lot of shows, and people really responded to the material really well, and I really felt that connection, and that I had really put something of myself a great deal of myself into that music, and that and I was getting the response from an audience that that felt that connection too. And it became a kind of an iconic sort of record for a lot of, particularly women, I would say, by and large.
It came out on Mushroom Records. How did you and Michael Gudinski get on?
Oh, we got on really well, yeah. I immediately liked him. He was a rogue, of course. It's the music business. But he felt like a rogue that, well, he had a sense of humour, and he was someone you could argue with, and you could, if you could convince him, you would absolutely get your own way.
Which is what you did for It's Only the Beginning video.
Oh, I know. He didn't want me to wear a golf outfit, and he didn't want to shoot it. I had modelled the film clip after one of my favourite films, which was Billy Wilder's Bringing Up Baby, 1938, something like that. Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn on the golf course, and it's a hilarious scene, and I wanted to homage that. I thought it would be a nice idea to tie in. It kind of a romantic idea, but a humorous idea, and I'd had my tangle with the dance thing, and I'd come away bruised. I didn't want to have anything to do with that sort of stuff. I wanted it to be it was faintly wholesome and whatever.
Oh, faintly wholesome, Deborah, though your nipples are showing.
They
are.
They are. Well, I didn't wear a bra. So, yes. And it was another cold time, yes, of making a video.
Well, your friend Carolyn Wilson said at the time, Deborah could have sold herself better and made incredibly sexy videos and become a pop star, but she wasn't prepared to. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, I think that's right. I didn't want to wear the things that at that time was expected of young women to wear. I didn't feel comfortable being presented as a sex symbol. I wasn't uncomfortable being attractive. I liked being attractive. And it done me proud for a long time. I'd made a lot of money being attractive. But I didn't want to sell the sex stuff.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be taken seriously. And which is not to say that I should rephrase that, because Debbie Harry was incredibly sexy, but she was also taken very seriously. I just didn't feel like it was me. I needed to be authentically me. And I was kind of a big dag, really. So, I felt like I needed to honour that too.
You've touched on your modelling, but we have to talk about some of the modelling, because that entered popular culture. I mean, the fact that you were a big M girl. Every girl in the late 70s and early 80s wanted to be a big M girl. And
really?
Absolutely.
Really?
That was a status
I don't
symbol.
believe you.
Oh, yeah, totally. Oh, totally. At one point,
you're lying.
Big M sales topped Coke in Victoria, and Coke were worried because of the big M girls.
Wow. Okay.
It was quite a status symbol. It was a sexy status symbol.
All right.
To be a big M girl. Absolutely.
I did not know that. But
were
there
you
go.
Miss Caramel or Miss Chocolate?
I think I was a Miss Caramel in the calendar.
Right. You got a calendar as well?
Yeah, I got the calendar. And then I was and then I was big hot egg flip M girl. How does that sound? Big hot egg flip M.
Were there even things such as a hot big M?
Yeah.
I can't imagine going to a milk bar.
Yeah, I did a TV. It was a TV commercial. Hair was all fluffy and Farrah Fawcett-y. I thought it was awful. Oh, my God. Anyway, it paid well. It paid very well. I bought a car, I got to move out of home. Yeah.
Bluegrass jeans?
Yes.
What do you remember about them?
Well, I was also quite surprised they chose my bottom.
Oh, it was your bottom?
It was my bottom, yes. So bluegrass jeans was, was a billboard that was advertising bluegrass jeans, and the caption was, "Get yours into bluegrass." And it was just a photograph of a bare ass, which was mine.
Fantastic.
And the call was like a whole bunch of people, going to a audition and dropped your pants, and they took a photograph of it, and I was always really comfortable with my body, and there was no, it was perfectly fine, la la la. And then I got it, and they paid really well, so great. Anyway, and then I you know, pushing the envelope as I do. I did it because I lived with journalists, not just Caro, but with Peter Wilmoth, and John Heslov, as we talked about earlier, was my good friend, and his brother, John's brother, Tony Heslov, was also a journalist, Herald Sun, something like that. And so we, did an interview with me talking about, because it became quite a scandalous talking point on radio. People were writing in and phoning in and
What,
complaining.
the fact that your behind was on a billboard?
Yeah, they
and
would,
get yours into it.
Yeah, but, you could imagine there was, people who were going, I have to drive past this billboard every day with my 2 young children in the car, and there's this filthy billboard with a bare ass. How dare you put this over the major arteries of Melbourne? How can you do that? Blah, blah, blah. All of that. And that's, and fair enough. I get it. But, at the time, I just thought it was funny. I thought it was hilarious. I still think it's hilarious. You can take a different route. But so I did a demystifying interview for it.
And how did you demystify it?
Well, I declared it was me, of course.
Right.
I said, and we just did stupid quips, oh, it's all behind me now. Got to get to the bottom of this, that sort of thing. And I think I was probably stoned at the time. But anyway, my mother ran to my grandmother's house the next morning and ripped that page out of the newspaper so she wouldn't see that
Oh, my goodness.
that it was me. Yeah. Anyway, funny.
There was also some acting as well that the modelling led to.
Mm-hmm.
Any parts of note you want to share with us?
The casting agent contacted model agencies to cast the part of Julie as the Rev Head's love interest for a film called Running on Empty.
Wow.
And so I was auditioned and I got the role. And I thought to myself, well, this is great. I'm going to earn enough money that I can just give up modelling. And modelling, it was always, I didn't mind doing it. But there was, it was always like that friction of, oh, you don't have a hairbrush. Well, I don't think my hair looks good when it's really brushed. You've asked me to do a hair commercial, but you actually want to, if you brush my hair, you're just going to get, big Jufro, and that's not going to work for you. But anyway, and shaving my, armpits or leg hair or whatever, that was always, I did it. Of course I did it. But I was not a careerist model, and it was prior to all of that supermodel stuff. And this was way before that stuff. It was just a job. And so Running on Empty came up and I said, yes, I'll do that. And then I never modelled again after that. So I was 23, didn't model again, did Running on Empty. And I just thought it was dreadful and it'll just go straight to video. And curiously, it is a cult hit movie.
Yeah.
So all these decades later, people love this film and they come up to me after shows. That's my favourite film. They're always men and they always ask me to sign something like some bit of a car or the DVD. It's so cute. And for a long time I just thought, oh, you're just taking the piss, aren't you? Because I'm terrible in it.
Oh.
But they weren't. They were genuinely serious. And I sort of missed the point, because the point was that there were just all these glorious looking cars that kept speeding across the screen, and that's why people went to it. And then, we were just, the thing that they could hang it off.
One thing that had massive influence still on the screen was the ABC TV show Sweet and Sour, of which you sing the title track, and you do it so brilliantly. It's so brilliant, Deborah. Sharon O'Neill, of course, wrote the song.
She did.
But you sang it.
So Martin Armiger, who was the producer, he was the guitarist in the Sports, another person who has gone to God. It's so sad. So many people he went to way too soon. Anyway, he heard the original version of Man Overboard, and he contacted me and said, I think you would, found my number, and I think it would be terrific to sing the part that Tracy Mann is going to play in this television show called Sweet and Sour, which is about a manufactured, or like a band that gets together and they're called the Takeaways, and they're going to record a couple of albums and there's going to be songs throughout this season, and would you sing Tracy Mann's voice? And I said, sure, no problem. And I said, but I don't really want to be credited because, I'm in this band. It's a kind of post-punk band, and I don't want, this conflict of there being Deborah Conway singing out front of a post-punk band and then Deborah Conway singing for a kind of a kids show of pop tunes. And they said, oh, that's perfect, because we don't want to credit you, because we want everybody to believe that Tracy's
the singer.
is the singer. And I went, great, let's do it. So, it went really well.
It's a brilliant song.
I'm not
from
even
start
sure
to
that my
finish.
name, I guess maybe my name is on the record.
It's not. I checked.
Oh, it's not on the
It's
record.
not on the record.
It was on the checks that they sent me.
Okay.
It was definitely there. So, yeah. No, it was just a sensational thing to do. And it was a really long, involved process, because there was a lot of songs. It was 2 albums worth.
Yeah.
And
yes, it was
sometimes
the second season, yeah.
sometimes I even sang the bass player's vocals as well.
Right.
I know there were a few of those tracks. Kathy McQuaid was the other singer, who was also in Deck Chairs Overboard. She was the bass player in Deck Chairs Overboard. And, so I just, this is Crow's Nest ABC, and they recorded in the basement, and there was just these endless linoleum floor tiles of black and white and green walls, and I would just wander down there, and Martin and I would spend hours and hours just, doing these songs. I loved it. It was really fun. It was a really great, melting pot of good creative people kind of working together behind the scenes to make that happen. It was thoroughly enjoyable. And I felt like it was, a really good part of my education.
1993, Bitch Epic's released. It has the now iconic cover of you basically munching cake.
Shoveling cake into my mouth, correct, yes. So the original shot came into being because I had participated in a series of television plays for the ABC called The 7 Deadly Sins, and there was a soundtrack that went with that, and we recorded it in Paradise Studios in Sydney with Paul Kelly and Vicar and Linda Bull and Renee Gayer. Oh, no, Linda wasn't there, sorry. Vicar Bull and Renee Gayer and Paul and I. And Martin Armiger was also part of that. So it would have been 1990. Yeah. And then there was a photo shoot. I think I was in one of the television shows.
Yeah.
I think I was playing the part of a marriage celebrant. So Elle magazine, in order to promote the television show, did a series of photographs of people who were involved in the production or the recording, and took their photographs as a representation of a sin. So no prizes for guessing that I was gluttony. So and then it was just such an incredible shot, and I got someone to take some photos on the day, and I sent one of these shots to a number of people as a Christmas card. And I sent these cards out, and one of the people that I sent it to was Pierre Baroni in Mushroom's art department. And when he heard that the second album, my second solo album, was called Bitch Epic, he said, "Oh, let's get hold of the shoot." And so they sent us Elle magazine, and I don't remember the name of the photographer, which is terrible. But anyway, they sent us the contact sheets from that shoot, and he constructed the album cover, for which he won an ARIA for a best album cover.
It's so iconic, Deborah.
It's
iconic.
It's a great image, isn't it? It's so good.
We've had it on display at the Australian Music Vault.
Oh, yeah, I
Just
saw it.
that
That's
image,
right.
yeah. What do you think of it when you look at it now?
Oh, all of the memories of that day come back. It was fun to do it. You can imagine, just being covered in Nutella and shoveling cream cakes into my mouth. I think it's a very powerful image, and it goes with the very powerful title. So it was kind of a match made in heaven. I'm really glad that Pierre came up with that. And he's another person who has unfortunately left us, but he was a big part of my career once I joined Mushroom, and we worked together. And long after I'd left, was not making records for Mushroom. I was still working with Pierre.
Wow.
So
great friendship then. Yeah. You mentioned Paul Kelly earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You dated him as well.
I dated him as well, yes.
What was Paul Kelly like as a boyfriend?
What was Paul Kelly like in bed?
No,
Um,
as a boy, the only reason why I ask, and forgive me for asking, but he seems like an artist that is so headstrong in what he creates and what he does. I wonder if he was he an accommodating boyfriend, or was he always right?
We didn't date for that long because it became complicated because I started dating his cousin as well.
Oh.
As you do. We were young. It was the 80s. What could I say? But he was very accommodating in that sense. So we were having, and everybody knew everything. It was a very honest, open, 3-part relationship. He was delightful. He would write lovely notes to me, postcards, little things, letters and stuff when he was out of town, which he was a lot. And, at the end of the period, Alex, his cousin, said, that's enough. I can't do it this way to choose. So I chose Alex. But Paul, I knew, Paul is very much in love with love, and that was nice to be part of too. And we've remained really good friends all these years later and decades later.
Well, this is interesting because Bitch Epic would involve a writer called Willy Zygier, who you wrote a lot of that record with, who is now your
Father
life
of
partner
my 3 children.
and father of your 3 children.
And we're getting on for 32 years now.
Which is epic, if I can use that word, in show business.
I think it is.
To last the distance.
Yeah. So we met because I needed a guitar player to tour String of Pearls. And both Richard Pleasance and Peter Farnan, who were in Boom Crash Opera.
Yeah.
And who were old friends of Willy's, and who I knew from that was another band that Do Re Mi toured with a lot. And we had the same manager.
Who was the manager?
Keith Welsh.
Keith Welsh.
Lovely Keith Welsh, who's a saint, really. I mean, he really should get a knighthood, and for dealing with all of us. Good grief. So I made the record String of Pearls with Richard. But Peter and I had been playing little shows. We played some little shows in LA at some point, and we, been hanging out together a lot. And so everyone knew everyone, but I'd never met Willy. And I think maybe I'd said to Richard, "Oh, do you want to play guitar on this tour?" And he was putting out his own album, which was Galleon.
Yes, Galleon.
Which I think I sang on that too. So he sang on mine, I sang on his. And he said, "Well, Willy Zygier is a terrific guitar player. He's really quirky. He's really interesting." And Peter Farnan on a separate conversation said the same thing to me. And so I rang Willy up, and I said, it's Deborah Conway here, and your name has been mentioned both by Richard Pleasance and Peter Farnan, and as someone who might be interested in playing guitar on my tour, and these are the dates. And he said to me, "Oh, no, I can't. I've got a gig." I said, "Oh, okay."
You were intrigued by that, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. So I thought about it, and I went, "He's got a gig. He's got one gig. I'm offering him 9 months of work, and he's got a gig." Now, there's a man of integrity. So I rang him back. I said, "Look, if I move my tour back a few weeks or whatever it was, I don't know how long, but I'll move it. Will you?
If I move heaven and earth for you.
Yeah. Will you come over and will you consider it?" He went, "Okay." So he came over to my apartment, and I opened the door, and both of us took this kind of like that. It was like a jolt, and we both felt it. It was very strange. And he came in, and we talked about music and our respective careers and, what I wanted from him and, blah, blah, blah. And he left and, he said, he'd do it. And then I think he came over. I was in his film clip that he was making for Tootieville, which was called Basic. And I did that. And then we started rehearsals sometime after that for the shows. And I think the flirting just started like straight out of the box, you know, from the very first moment that we were in the room together. It was just ridiculous. There was this extraordinary attraction. And then we went on tour, and then we had an affair, and then we both left our respective partners, and then we, you know, started writing songs and had 3 children, and here we all are 32 years later.
Amazing. And what are the chances that he's of similar background to you, family background?
Oh, he's Jewish.
Well?
You know?
Yeah, of
yes.
course, yeah.
Well, that was part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it.
Yeah.
You know, it was so kind of this incredible moment of recognition.
Wow. And so Bitch Epic, you co-write together. There's some beautiful moments on Bitch Epic. So that kind of cemented you down a road that was, I think, less poppy and more, I think, examining your songwriting craft. Because it certainly wasn't as poppy as String
Well,
of
it was,
Pearls.
you know, odd time signatures and things things. It was, yeah, String of Pearls was much more kind of straight ahead. You know, Willy was conservatorium trained, and he was and he had a, you know, reasonable career as a jazz musician prior to becoming a kind of avant-garde pop musician, government drums, and, you know, there were other, and Tootieville. So, you know, he brought that to the songwriting as well.
And you recorded that with Jim Rondinelli,
yes.
who was Matthew Sweet's
engineer.
Yeah. Bill McDonald recalls playing on the record.
Yeah.
And says he was just watching this beautiful romance, songwriting and romance between yourself and Willy grow, and has wonderfully fond memories. He also said you were so steadfast in what you wanted that perhaps, which you touched on before, but you were always painted perhaps by the media as difficult, but you were simply a woman who knew what she wants. And if a man had said, this is what I want, he'd be lauded and praised.
You know, I never really cared about what people said. I always thought that was kind of a strength, that it was a kind of a bargaining chip, that people wouldn't mess with you if you came across as, you know, someone who knew what they wanted. So it's never bothered me. In fact, I've always thought of being, you know, as an arrow in my quiver, if you like. And I mean, who cares if people think I'm difficult? You know, the person that I spend most of my time with doesn't think that. So, you know, well, maybe he does, but he's still there. You know, so, I mean, it's neither here nor there. But it's really, honestly, it's so refreshing to know what you want sometimes, because a lot of the time you go through life not knowing what the fuck you want.
But when it comes to your craft, is it fair to say that you know exactly what you're after?
I think that's it's more clear.
Yeah. We have to talk about another beautiful moment, 2001 Ultrasound, the song, where you appear in the video, your beautiful pregnant belly. It's on your 3rd record. As
My Third Husband.
My Third Husband, of course. What was the husband the euphemism for, the record?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
My Third Husband was my 3rd album. I like to say to the press, you know, I'm married to my work, but I like to fuck around.
It has the beautiful line, there is something growing inside of me. It feels like indigestion.
Exactly. Yeah, I was really happy with that lyric. I was happy, you know, I think there was a good record. I think it was largely overlooked. I think that probably production-wise we went down a bit of a rabbit hole. We were very, very influenced by Portishead at that time. We were also sleep-deprived completely. And I think I was having a midlife crisis, to be honest.
Midlife crisis?
Oh, yeah, a little bit. I mean, we were living in London. I'd gone over there to release a combination of String of Pearls and Bitch Epic, which is what Mushroom had presented to me as something that they wanted to do through their Mushroom office. And when I got there, everything had imploded because they'd spent too much money on Peter Andre, and the financial office had come over and said, stop spending money now. And so we uprooted, including our 3-month-old baby who had just been born, who didn't sleep until she was 4 years old, did not sleep through the night once.
Oh, my goodness.
And so, you know, and we were just there,
right,
hemorrhaging, you know, cash, trying to kind of figure out what we were doing. But I think I was very stubborn, and I wouldn't come back until we made a record.
Right.
So that's what we did.
Okay.
And And I think that the fingerprints of that period are all over My Third Husband. And I mean, the songs are reflecting exactly those things that we were doing. But I think it's dark and it's really good. But I think it was just not what people expected or wanted from the girl that had spun around on a golf course, singing, a jolly, happy song about new love. And then I'd come back with this thing that I think people didn't quite know what to do with. And then, the kicker was that, Triple J said to me, "Oh, no, we can't play this. It's too mature."
Too mature?
No, I think it was me who was too mature, you see. So.
That was the final release on Mushroom Records too.
Yes.
Did that end well for you?
It ended, so that was good.
Okay.
I mean, it was, I think they didn't know what to do with me, and there was no point in me being, and then it was like that, it was that moment that you were starting to realise the possibilities of what the new technologies could do. I mean, you were starting to realise the potential of making an album in your own house without going into thousands, $1,500 a day studios with expensive producers. So after My Third Husband, and it came out in the end of 97, and then Alma came out the beginning of 98. So I was kind of very pregnant when I was touring that record, and it was very hot. And then we sort of saw the kind of exciting horizon of becoming independent and how that could be. And so we did. Yeah. And the next record was Exquisite Stereo, which we made at home. And we licensed it through Shock.
Yep.
And then I think there was Patsy Cline that we did at home as well, and that came out with the record. But then in 2004, that's when we really we're really super independent, and we had our own record company.
And you've kind of remained fiercely independent since, haven't you?
Yes.
Do you think you'd bother with
Fiercely
a record
or
label?
foolishly, whatever that might entail, I don't know, whatever it is. But I mean, I don't know that anyone wants to work with me anymore anyway. So,
really?
Well, I mean.
Is that how you feel?
No, well, in part, I think people think I'm too difficult.
No. Super talented, opinionated.
All of that.
Difficult.
At any rate, it's a moot point.
Right.
And I'm very happy. The current situation is a happy one for me. And who knows what the music business is anyway. I mean, what do you do now? You've got a bunch of songs. What do you do with them? You just put them out as on a streaming platform,
and pray for the best, I think.
The last 3 records that we've made, I think, have been absolutely the best thing I've ever done. Words of Men, Everybody's Begging, Stories of Ghosts. Not in that order. That's the reverse order of them.
Well, let's talk about those records. Stories of Ghosts is based on Old Testament stories. Was that the beginning of you exploring your Jewish roots, or had you done that previously?
So there was the album before that was Half Man, Half Woman, and that had a track on it called Take Pity on the Beast, which was an 8-minute diatribe, I suppose, or not diatribe, that's the wrong word for it, but a kind of a profile of a lot of people that I knew. And the last verse was lines taken from a prayer book called the Haggadah, which is read at a Passover meal, the Seder, every year. And I, have been doing it since I was a kid, and I knew these lines so well, and it's beautiful poetry. It's the Haggadah is a kind of it's commentary on the Exodus, the story of Exodus. So the commentary is coming from all of the different rabbis talking to each other through over a period of 100 years more. I don't know, not exactly sure. I haven't studied it. And, trading their ideas about what this is. And so it's a really interesting amalgam of poetry and strange arcane facts and mathematics and it's kind of bizarre, but intriguing. And it never gets less intriguing as you go through it. It's the more familiar you are with it, the more intriguing it becomes. So I use some of these lines in this song. And then we were asked to be involved with a Jewish music festival in Sydney called Sheer Madness, which was being run by a guy called Gary Holzman. And that sounded like an interesting thing to do. And we played this song. So I think that was 2010. And we played Take Pity on the Beast, and there was just so many kids kind of dancing around in front of the stage, and all of these people and I knew that I was talking to people who understood what I was talking about. And to see all these kids whose grandparents, great-grandparents were probably in the Holocaust. And it was the most extraordinarily powerful moment. I just, it was galvanizing. And it kind of opened a gateway. And so our association continued with Sheer Madness to the point that a few years later, Willy and I put on Sheer Madness in Melbourne as the Melbourne Jewish Music Festival. And we ran it as a biennial festival for a couple of years as volunteers. And it was huge. It was a huge thing to do as a volunteer. And I'd already done a festival. I'd already done the Queensland Music Festival. But this was completely tabula rasa. There was nothing, I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to fundraise. I had to organise toilets, toilet paper, everything, every conceivable idea about what a festival would be and where it would be and how you would, promote it and soundproof it and blah, 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 everything. And it was extraordinary. And I think prior to that, we wrote Stories of Ghosts. And Stories of Ghosts was an outgrowth of that song Take Pity on the Beast, in the sense that moment at Sheer Madness, when I felt like, my Jewishness and my being a musician had kind of suddenly come together. And it had never really happened before. I mean, I've always been Jewish. I've been a musician since I was, 18, 19. But never had I thought about these two things as having that intimate connection. And so I think Stories of Ghosts grew out of that, and also as a response to a lot of grief that was also going on in our lives. A lot of people, there was a number of suicides, and 3 of our parents died that had just really quickly died. And anyway, it all came out of that, and it was a yearning to find something connecting and nourishing. And good grief. The Torah is a touchstone of inspiration for so many people all across the world for thousands of years. And why not us? Why not? So that's where we went.
You talk about that connection that you have with your Jewish community. Do you feel more at home there now, perhaps, than you ever did, perhaps, in the mainstream music world?
Or less. I don't know. It's just, I don't feel uncomfortable in the mainstream music world. But it was a fun thing to do, to feel that connection with that community when we were running the festival. That was a great thing. And I really enjoyed it. And I loved giving back. And I felt very comfortable with all of that. And, Willy and I felt, I think he would say he felt the same way.
So you mentioned some of those festivals that you were involved with. You became artistic director
of the Queensland Music
Festival. The Queensland Music
in 2008.
Yeah, that's right. Do you think creatively you were searching for something different at this point? Because you'd done the music and now you talk about.
I think I was always open. I think that the most fantastic thing about the career that I've managed to carve out, and I'm not saying that other people don't, I'm sure they do. There's a lot of people in this particular business that have gone in scattergun directions. And I've just been incredibly blessed to have been contacted to do things like Dreaming Transportation for Andre Greenwell, which was a glorious portrait of earliest female settlement of the colonies in a kind of in strange jazz, opera, folk, idioms, and I was a big part of that and for several performances. And I've also, we did the summer wear parties and we did Broad, and so has always been something that I've welcomed into my life. I love the fact that the phone can ring and you can suddenly be going off to the Adelaide Cabaret Festival to do Elvis songs with Paul Grabowski, Joe Camilleri, and a bunch of fabulous Melbourne avant-garde jazz musicians. And what an incredible thing to be able to wake up at any one morning and just not actually exactly know what's going to happen. I love that.
You mentioned summer wear parties. We have to explain what they are. I think you are, I have fact checked, I think you are the first
I am.
to actually create the idea of an artist going to somebody's house or backyard to perform live. And this is way before lockdown.
I think this is one of my proudest moments that I came
Apart
up
from
with
your
this.
children.
I came up with this in a professional sense. We came up with this extraordinary, innovative way, and it's directly related, of course, to the fact that we didn't have a record company, because you wouldn't do this for a record company. And so I was, there thinking, well, at that point, radio are not particularly interested in playing the stuff that we're putting out. And how do you get onto radio? How do you get people to listen to if you're not in their living rooms on their radio station? And then I thought, you walk into their living room. I mean, it was that kind of, and it was like this great light bulb moment. So I ran into the bedroom. I said, Willy, listen to this. Has anyone ever done this? Someone must have done it. And we looked it up. No one had ever done it. And so we did it. At one point, they had this little tour that we were doing in Sydney, in New South Wales, with 14 shows over a few days, 5 days or something, I don't know. And we just turned up and we had Channel 7 and Channel 2 and Channel 9 all following us around. We had profiles in the Australian newspaper and The Age and stuff. And, people were really enchanted by this brand new idea. And, of course, it then spurred on companies like Parlour. And maybe there was another one as well.
Yeah.
That came some years afterwards, and they've contacted me. Look, we've got this company and we do this thing. And I write to them and say, do you know where that idea came from? Because I can't help myself.
Of course.
Because I can't help myself. That's right. You see, that's why I'm difficult to work with, because I have to point that out. I should have just gone, yeah, great, brilliant idea. Anyway.
Were there memorable gigs or food that you were offered in people's houses?
Yeah. No, there was absolutely incredible, memorable gigs, and I've written a chapter about that in the book. And
Uber fans? Uber fans?
Oh, lots of. But the thing was, Jane, you didn't. The whole point was that you'd have this thing, and there would be one Uber fan who would go, "Oh my God, Deborah Conway will come to our house and play 4 songs, and she'll bring CDs and she'll sign them for us if I can just get enough people together to buy some records." I think we sold, at the beginning it was 25 and we upped it to 30 or whatever. And so, one fan would get it going and they'd invite all these people and they'd say, "Deborah who? Oh, yeah, she was that chick that did, Shout Man Overboard. Oh, is she still a musician?" That kind of thing. And that's fine, because then they'd turn up and we would give them, like the 4 songs off Summertown, which all lent themselves beautifully to this acoustic setting. And people would kind of, their hearts would be full of the love of, spending an afternoon, evening with their families and music, and they've got this CD and it's not just a bit of plastic anymore. It's kind of a memento of this event that they've had such a lovely time, sharing music. And so it took off, and it was much more than a marketing idea. It became the way we sold records. So it was fantastic.
You still doing it today?
Yes and no. I mean, I haven't. COVID's just happened, and we haven't done it. But I think there is actually one coming up. And now that you remind me, I should check my diary. There is one coming
Well,
up pretty
speaking
soon.
of COVID, it was
Yeah.
wonderful to see you performing with Willy and your 3 daughters during lockdown. There
Yeah.
seemed to be sing-alongs galore.
Yeah, there were. I think we did one for, I think the Australian newspaper, Andrew McMillan contacted me and said, and I think we were like the first cab off the rank, and Missy Higgins that weekend too. We all did it together. They're really fantastic singers.
Yeah, your middle daughter's musically talented, Alma. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
they all are.
All talented.
Alma's really pursued it hard.
Yeah.
Harder than the other two. Hetty had a great punk band actually before she left the country. It was called the Pinstripes, and they
Wow.
actually were getting a lot of airplay
right.
in France as well.
Wow.
Made a few videos. You could check them out. They're good. Alma is a beautiful, beautiful jazz singer. I mean, you really want me to rave on?
Of course, I
on
want to hear all
on
about
this?
it. Of course I do.
She's the best. She's an extraordinary singer. I mean, she's heart-meltingly good.
Wow.
I mean, they're not going to take me seriously. I'm her mother, for God's sake. But she is. You know, she'll come up with these songs that many of them that are just standards that you only ever think of them as being kind of a bit cheesy or whatever because you've heard too many versions of them where they've not been, where they're not connected with. And then she'll sing it, and she's connected with it in a way that you've never really quite heard it like that before, and you find yourself weeping at the end because she's just got to you.
Wow.
And I've seen grown men reduced to tears over and over again because she's so powerful.
Do they have much opinion about your work, especially the early 80s work?
Oh yeah, they're all incredibly loving and enthusiastic about it, which is so adorable actually.
In 2020, you received a Member of the Order of Australia for significant service to the performing arts as singer, songwriter and producer. Was your dad around to see that?
No, he died in 2011.
What did you think when you'd won that, or when you were awarded, I should say?
I was very chuffed. It was an incredible thing. And, I'm very grateful to the person who was a fan of mine, who went to an enormous amount of trouble to nominate me. She's a beautiful soul. LJ, if you're listening to this. And apparently the process takes years and it's hugely problematic. And of course it's secret too. So I didn't know until it was, and then I think it was, I don't think I was able to be presented with my award until maybe the year after because of COVID. So, and then it was all done in private audience with the governor, and my mum came, and apparently she plays bridge with the governor's sister, and there was like, no hugs, no, don't hug. They didn't mind. It was very sweet. Look, it was gorgeous. I've got my AM on.
How wonderful!
I wear my AM because if I don't wear it, my mother says, "Why aren't you wearing your AM, darling?" So
Was she the kind of mother that cut out articles every time you were featured?
Yeah.
Are there scrapbooks of your life?
I don't know that she did scrapbooks, but she cut everything out, and there was lots of video stuff that she recorded off both of them. I mean, my father too. He was very. I presented him with my first gold record from Domestic Harmony, and I remember he wept. So he was a complicated fellow. Yeah.
You mentioned you're writing a memoir currently.
Mm-hmm.
What's the title?
Book of Life.
Book of Life. What's next for Deborah Conway?
Well, I wrote a lot during COVID. So, because what else could you do? You just sat on the couch and wrote another chapter. So I've managed to trim that down to a manageable book size length. But also what we did, Willy and I wrote a show as inspired by the book. So we have a show called Songs from the Book of Life.
Wow.
Which is being presented by the Arts Centre, and we'll tour the country. And that will be a two-hander, and we'll weave stories. And so I'm,
So it's your life on stage, essentially.
My life. It's an autobiographical musical memoir.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've done it. We've done it before, but in regional Victoria and New South Wales, and it went down very well. And people didn't know what they were coming to see, so they appreciated the the fact that they had come to a music concert but actually were being treated to something theatrical and, were very quiet. And I'd come off stage at the interval and say, Willy, they're not saying anything. He said they're listening. So that was wonderful.
Wow.
And they would tell us how much they enjoyed it at the end. And this is a much more streamlined version of that piece. And I think it's better. And I think I'm very excited to be delivering it. And I'm testing myself in all kinds of ways, including dancing. Jane, I'm going to dance. So yeah, all singing, all dancing.
Should we be worried?
Yeah, maybe.
What is the biggest misconception about you?
That I'm difficult. I'm such a pussycat.
Ah,
Yeah.
how would you like to be remembered?
As difficult? No, I don't know. I suppose as hard, I don't know, as a good mother. As a good mother, as a good partner, as someone who dedicated that'll do.
Oh.
Stop it now. Stop it now.
Well, we started this interview with just 3 words: singer wants band. How should we end it? What 3 words should we end it with?
Thank you very much.
Deborah Conway, I've loved spending time with you this afternoon. You're going to make me
can't
cry
believe-
too.
I can't believe it.